Hello and welcome to the Game Business Show. This week, Donkey Kong is back and impressing critics. Ubisoft has delivered disappointing results. The Outer Worlds 2 has gone down in price. Free-to-play shooter Splitgate 2 is unlaunching and the Chinese room has gone independent. But our big topic today is about the US games market and looking at the market data for June, which was a big month for video game launches. And who better to guest host this episode than Mr. Circana himself, someone we've wanted on the show pretty much from day one. Executive Director and Video Game Analyst at Circana. It's Mat Piscatella. Hello, Matt. Welcome to the show.
Hello. You know what? This is going to be one for the real sickos. Like, if you're a real sicko video game salesperson, are we here for you?
It might put off everyone else. Certainly one for the data nuts. I mean, technically, this isn't your first appearance on the show. You were our opening speaker at the Game Business Live event in Los Angeles back last month. That's actually available to watch on our YouTube channel. So if people want to cover that, we've also covered it in our news show as well. It wasn't the happiest of conversations. And you've been sounding alarm bells over the economic uncertainty in the US market now for a few months.
Yeah, I mean, the US is going through a moment right now, particularly when it comes to the area of affordability, incomes, the tariff situation, which changes on a moment-to-moment basis. There is just a lot of uncertainty, and consumers are reacting to that uncertainty. And so there's a lot of concern about where consumer mindset is and the decisions they're making in terms of their purchasing. And they're having to make some very difficult choices.
It's certainly a difficult scenario. But before we delve into June, which I thought was a really big month for video games, I actually wanted to bring up a game from last week, which was Donkey Kong Bonanza for Nintendo Switch 2. Matt, have you played it? Have you seen much about the game? Have you engaged in the game very much?
I have played it. It's been very cathartic to smash all of the things.
Well, I think it's brilliant. I'm a Donkey Kong fan. In fact, last year in London, I reunited the Donkey Kong Country dev team as the 1994 game to sort of talk about that. I'm big Donkey Kong fan, so I'm very excited about it from a personal point of view. But actually, I was really interested in it from a business point of view, because I actually am more interested in this than the launch of Switch 2, because this is what really Nintendo is about these days. They're more than ever an entertainment business. They're an IP business. And they've always been that. But nowadays, they're making movies and theme parks, museums, alarm clocks, Lego sets. And they're getting themselves involved in all of those things. They're not just licensing that stuff out there. They're sort of taking that internally to a degree. And we've seen them do that with Mario. And we've seen them doing that, turn their attention to Zelda, with a Zelda movie out in a couple of years. But I would argue probably their most recognizable character outside of Mario, and if we discount Pokemon because it's not technically theirs, I think their most recognizable character outside of Mario is Donkey Kong. It's an iconic brand, well-established character, but as a games franchise, it's by Nintendo standards pretty small, right? I mean, is the big relaunch of the series in 1994 that Rare did. I mentioned that a second ago. There was a brief stint with bongos on the GameCube, but not many people had a GameCube. Donkey Kong Country Returns did really well, actually. It did in the UK. I don't know. I'm assuming it did in the US as well. That's the 2010 game. But its follow-up, Tropical Freeze Wii U game, nobody had that either. So that didn't do huge numbers. Switch era, though, we've barely seen Donkey Kong, and there's been a handful of remakes and ports. There was a really good Donkey Kong expansion to the first Mario & Rabbids game, which I thought was brilliant. But nothing sort of standalone, nothing original. And so the biggest DK moments in the last, say 3, 4, 5 years has been the theme park expansion at Universal Studios Japan. It's been the appearance in the Mario movie. For me, this is significant. I felt this is, I'd argue this is as important. Redesigned the character as well, so it feels as significant as the 1994 relaunch. So I was really fascinated by how well it was going to do. And we're not going to know from the launch sales because it's a long, it's only been a month since the console came out. And it's not Mario, right? It's never going to do Mario numbers in week one. But it seems to, I only got the UK figures, Matt. Maybe you've got something a little bit more US, a little bit more current, but it seems to have got to comparing it to a Mario game, it's never going to do those numbers. But in terms of Donkey Kong games, it's towards the top end.
I mean, imagine it would be. I mean, it's great to see Nintendo making games. I like when they actually put out big games. Like you said, their focus is, more broad now and trying to bring the IP far more mass market, which they've done a absolutely brilliant job of. But getting a big new video game, that's pretty fun. That's a good thing to see. And you're right. Like, DK has had its place in the market. Bigger than Metroid, not as big as Mario, a really solid performer. And even, games like Tropical Freeze HD on Switch have done pretty darn well over time. But yeah, it's really fun to see them lean into this type of game with this type of experience, which is new, unique, different in a lot of ways, but staying, true to the core of what makes a Nintendo franchise game kind of great. It's really fun to see the reactions from players too. People seem to be really having a good time discovering, it's a big discovery game, right? You smash all the things. Hey, look at this. And that's pretty fun. So it's just really great to see it.
It feels like a cross between, it's got the Mario Odyssey influence, you can see that, but it also feels a bit Splatoon-y in the way that you sort of, it's a bit chaotic, but it's also feels a bit Tears of the Kingdom. Like the first thing I did in that game was complete a mission objective, what wasn't how I was supposed to do it. I found that out later. I created a bridge rather than raise some water. And yeah, it has that sort of vibe to it. I asked Dorian Block over in the UK, who runs Nielsen IQ. Before that, they were GFK Entertainment. Before that, they were Chart Track. Before that, they were Gallup. So he's got market data that goes back to the 80s. And okay, it gets increasingly less reliable the further back you go. But the only games missing from his list from Donkey Kong is the NES Donkey Kong from 1986 and Donkey Kong Classic, also on the NES, and that's from 1988. So he's basically got every Donkey Kong game. It's got some data on every Donkey Kong going back to 1994. So I wanted to know, what was the biggest week one for Donkey Kong games? And in classic Dorian Block fashion, he didn't give me a direct answer. He did give me a chart. So in terms of the best week one ever for Donkey Kong, that is technically, by the data he's got, Donkey Kong Country Returns on Wii. It was a bigger week one launch than Donkey Kong Bonanza. But he doesn't have Nintendo eShop data, and he doesn't have Nintendo Direct Store data. And it's only a few thousand gap between the two. So I think we can safely say that in terms of week one launches, Donkey Kong Bonanza was the biggest ever launch for a Donkey Kong game. But he didn't just give me that. He gave me the best weeks ever for Donkey Kong. So like Donkey Kong Country Returns best week was week 2 of that game's launch. And that was actually a lot stronger. Donkey Kong Country's best week was week 6. That was just before Christmas. Donkey Kong Country 2's best week was week 2. So, but anyway, regarding that, the way the data's got, Donkey Kong Bonanza is definitely the second biggest week for a Donkey Kong game. It's probably the biggest launch for a Donkey Kong game we've had of all time. But what I love the most about Dorian's chart, which annoyingly I've not stuck in front of me, is the fact that all of the top 5 are different platforms. The biggest, number 1, Donkey Kong Country Returns for second week on sale. Donkey Kong Bonanza, Nintendo Switch 2. To Donkey Kong Country Returns was Wii. Donkey Kong Country SNES. Donkey Kong 64 was number 4. That's from week 50, 1999. And then Mario vs. Donkey Kong is the biggest launch basically for Donkey Kong game. That's a Switch game. That was from last year. So yeah, it's all different platforms for Donkey Kong. But I think, Donkey Kong Bonanza is going to be a lot. It's about the long term now. Assuming there is a movie, there's talk of a Donkey Kong movie down the line, and with its continued investment in that IP, I suspect it'll hover around doing a good few 100,000 a quarter, if not 1 million. So it's, I hope it does well. It's certainly an unusual game to have as an early launch title for a Nintendo platform. But it is a game that, it's a franchise that's been sort of missing for a little while.
You know what? Total confirmation that this is really going to be an episode for the sickos, since we're getting into week by week sales rankings. Oh, this is great. This is my element. Yeah, I mean, back in the day, week ones weren't what they are now. Week ones were, hey, the game might be at the retailer. It might not show up until next week. Who really knows? Who really cares? Like, there wasn't this urgency for day one that we have now. So, I mean, you often see that where weeks 2, 3, 4 are actually better because the stores actually put the games out finally.
Yeah.
Not so much a problem now. And you're right, with the eShop share, which is, I mean, ballpark, you're looking at 45 to 55% generally of sales are going to be digital for games on the eShop that also have a physical component.
Really?
I mean, yeah, that's what we're looking at now in terms of the base estimates for some of these games. Some are a little bit higher, some are a little bit lower, according to our research. So yeah, you're looking at a record launch for this game as well. But yeah, unfortunately with the eShop digital restrictions, which, are tough for everyone in this line of work, you do what you can with what you got.
Yeah. I remember on Switch 1 when the GSD data for Europe, Nintendo never shared their data, despite the fact Iwata very famously said that he was going to share all of their digital data so that we knew how to react. They've never really done it outside of their own financials.
Yeah.
When it was like third party games, I used to look at things like Monster Hunter and Mario and Rabbids and Just Dance and Lego games, they sort of titles to do well on Switch. In the Europe, it was like, sometimes less than 20% of sales were digital. But obviously with Switch 2, I didn't know if that was, so that number, is that generally, or was that just like the Switch 2 you're predicting, estimating?
Generally for Nintendo platforms. I mean, in 2012, it was like less than 2%. And that rate's been growing steadily over time for the market as a whole.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, that's the core assumption when you really start, digging into the financial reporting and doing a bunch of assumption math. That's kind of the range you get to. But of course, like it's imperfect to say the least. The error bars are large, but it's most likely a record-setting launch. But yeah, with anything Nintendo first party, the launch period doesn't really matter because these games will sell forever at a premium price point, further separating what Nintendo does from what just about everyone else can do. And good for them for maintaining that kind of brand equity.
Yeah, I like the story before about how, the first week wasn't always that big a deal. Ocarina of Time, I don't know if it was ever like this in the US. In the UK, we had like, what's the Christmas #1 music album? And we tried this for a period of time. It was going to be Christmas #1 in games. And because we didn't have Black Friday till the last, 10 years or so.
It's still weird that it's a thing there. Like, that just shouldn't be. All right, but we'll leave that alone. That's just a weird deal still.
Yeah, but we didn't have Black Friday, so our biggest week was always the week before Christmas. And our first sales period around that time was the week after Christmas. That used to be the case. So Christmas #1 used to be a story in the UK games industry. And Chart Track sometimes, or GfK, Nielsen, I've lost track. And they would put out what was the #1 game every Christmas. And standing out, it was always FIFA or Call of Duty. And the one stuck out like a sore thumb was Zelda Ocarina of Time from 1998. And it's because when it first came out, which was like 2 weeks earlier, nobody put it on shelves. There wasn't enough stock. There wasn't enough shipments. And then they just went, oh, hang on, people want this. And they stuffed it all on shelves and suddenly the sales spiked.
Hey, that box back on the floor, Johnny, go get it. It's been sitting there for a week. Maybe we should put it out for sale. I don't know. There's a lot of, people have a lot of concerns about the digital marketplace, but actually being able to get the game you want when you want it, digital makes that a lot easier. So
yeah.
And an eShop that actually functions on the Switch 2 the way you want it to certainly won't hurt.
Yeah. Well, if you had a bad experience, Matt.
Well, the Switch 1 eShop was could be challenging to navigate, we'll say.
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly. Well, let's talk about the June market figures. It's a big month for the games industry generally, June. There was a lot of games, some of them that aren't even in this data. And there's some great numbers here from Circana. US games market up 22% in June 2025 versus June 2024. Games content, so that's games, DLC, all that sort of stuff, up 6%. Accessories up 29%. But the big one, games hardware up 249%, driven obviously by the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2. Which is the biggest launch for a game console in US history, 1.6 million units sold by the end of the month. That's 500,000 more than the previous best, the PS4, back in 2013. Matt, can we conclude much from the Switch 2 launch, other than the fact that they had stock?
Yeah, we can conclude from the high sales of Switch 2 at launch that they made a lot of Switch 2 units available for sale at launch. And unfortunately, there's not... great start, not taking anything away from it. They were super confident. They put the money where their mouth was and said, we believe we're going to be able to sell this. We're going to take the knees out of the scalper and secondary market. We're going to make sure that if people want a Switch 2, they're going to be able to get one from us at MSRP or thereabouts. And for the most part, they succeeded in doing that. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful. But ultimately, as you know, the launch sales of a hardware device don't often correlate to the lifetime sales. We've had devices that have come out with incredible early sales that have fallen off, and other consoles and devices that have come out with weak sales at launch that end up being some of the best-selling systems of all time. So we really can't take a lot in terms of long-term or long tail about what this is going to look like. But hey, a record-setting launch like this, I don't think anyone's going to be upset with that or say that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's tough right now to come away with any long-term conclusions or projections based on the early read, although this is a hell of a good early read.
Yeah, I think I think somebody told me it took 4 months for the Switch 1 to hit the same number. But again, that's all stock related. Are you sticking with your 4.3 million projection for the year?
Yeah, this is basically where I wanted it to be. Probably a little bit better than I was hoping for. So yeah, sticking with that, and we'll see what happens. I mean, the price point, the content slate, not a problem for the day one buyer, but that mass market gift buyer in the holiday window could be a different story. And of course, in the US market in particular, all of the uncertainty around pricing, the tariff situation, and just where people are financially is going to play into that as well. So we're going to have to see. The range of error on any forecast now in the video game space, in the US in particular, is the highest it's ever been. And it's always been high. It's always been a very difficult market to project. And now, given all the particular factors impacting the US in particular, it's even more unpredictable. But so far, great start. The enthusiast audience definitely showed up day one. Now we have to see if they can successfully transition to the mass market gift buyer, and that'll be the next test.
Yeah, they've just announced a Pokemon bundle, which will probably have some effect.
Put some Pokemon cards in there, and you'll sell out in no time, man. They'll have people running over each other at the Costco.
I love the stat that almost a third of Switch 2 owners bought one of those pricey Pro controllers.
Yeah.
I guess that's Mario Kart multiplayer there. But those are, particularly as the controllers from the previous Switch, work with them. I thought that was an impressive number. I thought it was anyway.
It is. And I included that in particular because I think it says something about the average day one Switch 2 buyer. Historically, people have considered the Nintendo buyer to be more family, more kids. And I think this is one of those data points that suggest that perhaps the Switch 2 day one buyer is more enthusiast gamer and very much enthusiast player rather than family. Now, I don't know that for sure, but I think that is a data point that would suggest that we have that audience could be more enthusiast gamer than mass market at this point.
What also backed up that for me, and it's a really small one, was that the attach rate for Mario Kart World, and it doesn't include digital, you've got it as 82% with the bundle, which is super high. That's super high.
Yes.
But it's not as high as Zelda was, right? If I recall Breath of the Wild back in 2017, that was over 100% attach rate. It was a bonkers thing. So and Mario Kart is more of the mainstreamy family kids Zelda IP. At least I don't have the data to back that up. That's just my theory on it. And even though it does appeal to hardcore gamers, obviously, I do wonder if, there's a bunch of people that bought a Switch and actually bought it for, better versions of Pokemon and Zelda and that kind of thing. There's clearly some people that did. But even though the 80% seems high, I actually thought it'd be higher.
So in terms of the splits in the hardware, the bundle was the primary SKU purchased. It was the majority of sales of Switch 2 hardware. And with the physical standalone, getting to that 82%, you add the standalone digital, you're probably in the 90% attach range. It helps that this was the showcase game, not dissimilar to when the Xbox 360 launched and Call of Duty 2 was the showcase game for that system. Every once in a while, you get a new hardware device where one game is the game. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. But you're right. The appeal of this box is also that it plays some of the past games the way you'd want to play them if you were really into them, with higher frame rates and better resolutions and all of that fun stuff. So there's a little bit, there's been a lot of chatter online about how the slate wasn't super compelling and that there weren't enough games, which, if you're a traditional buyer looking at it in the framework of new box, new games for the box, I don't care about anything else because that's not going to be good enough for this new thing, then I guess I can see that criticism. But when you look at the total package and the total content library available, it's tough to say that this is a system that has a light slate of things to play.
And I understand the argument that it was a weak lineup. In fact, I sort of agree with it. I felt there wasn't a hero title for it, even though Mario Kart World it is one. But for me, because the audience is more hardcore, I think they would much rather have had a Zelda or even a Metroid.
Sure.
The reality is, is the lineup strong enough? that's a question that matters at like Christmas, right? That's when you're trying to reach people where that's going to matter more than, we Nintendo fans, we're buying it anyway.
Yeah, you're showing up day one no matter what. And they could have priced the system even higher and would have sold out because the very core enthusiast Nintendo fan will show up. They won't care. They'll be there. But yeah, it's month 3, 4, 5 in the holiday. That's when things get more interesting and everything starts mattering more. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the games that came out. So yeah, Mario Kart. I didn't save your chart, Matt. That's absolutely outrageous. You think I'd be prepared for this? I
got a lot of charts. I am just covered in charts all the time.
Elden Ring Night Rain is number 1, which I thought actually surprised me, even though I know it came at the end of May, so it's right at the end of the previous month. So I can see why most of the sales is pushing to June. But when not many people are talking about that in terms of the media, but to see it come out as the number 1 game of June, I was surprised to see that, even though Elden Ring's a massive IP and it's obviously got a lot of mass appeal as a concept, which I think speaks to me paying too much attention to the media and not enough attention to where gamers are these days.
Yeah, it was really helped by PC. That was a particularly strong platform for Night Rain in month 2. PC is kind of just a fun environment right now to begin with. You go back and look at something like Helldivers 2 and just how strong it was on PC. People, especially like enthusiast players, enthusiast console fans, think of Helldivers 2 as a PlayStation game. But really, it's a PC game. Like, it's primarily paid and has primarily been bought on PC. And, some of these games that, people consider as part of the console ecosystem are doing so well on PC that it could have a knock-on effect on something like the best-selling titles chart, like we saw in June with Night Rain. I mean, of course, like looking at the comparative slate or the titles it was competing with, especially when Cart doesn't include standalone digital and was so heavily bundled, kind of skews that a bit. And, Death Stranding 2, while being a big game, that is very much that enthusiast niche audience. That's not a big mass market title.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah, okay. So he didn't have the competition really. I mean, a Mario Kart may have been there if we.
It certainly would have been.
Yeah,
significant margin.
Yeah,
but just at the peculiarities of how the charts are constructed.
So Death Stranding 2 worried me a little bit. It didn't worry me. I wasn't losing sleep over it. I'm sure Kojima would do very well. But the first game had a mixed reception. And although this one had reviewed very well and was seen as a little bit more accessible, I did worry that the sort of Marmite reaction the first game would probably hurt the launch of this one. I feared it might do. The chart placement seems positive, but it sounds to me like it wasn't one of your mega PS5 launches.
And it's top 30 year to date, which is fine. I don't look at it and go, well, that's disappointing. Or I don't look at that and go, well, that actually did really well or better than expected. It's fine. It's fine. I don't, sometimes the game comes out, you look at it and you go, well, that's what that did. Yeah, right. And that's kind of how I look at Death Stranding 2. It's fine.
Yeah. It's like people ask me. I did a tweet yesterday about the Donkey Kong Bonanza earlier in the week about how that did in the UK based on physical sales, and there's people commented, was it good? Was it bad? And I'm like, no, it didn't do as well as Mario, but I didn't expect it to. It was better than most Donkey Kong games, but I expected it to be.
It's the framework of the internet conversation, right? Like, it's either this is the biggest thing ever or this was a huge failure. And everything in between just gets kind of muddled these days because, you look on YouTube or anything, like there's like, this did okay. There's none of that.
Can't just say, yeah, it
did all right.
Meeting expectations isn't an option anymore. It's like,
no, it's got to be, this is the biggest hit ever and saves the industry. Or this was a huge failure and everyone's getting
yeah,
it can be exhausting. But yeah, so it's cool. It's fine. There's not really a lot to say about its performance. It did fine. It reviewed well. The people that like the game really like the game and it's going to appeal to that audience and maybe not much more beyond that. Yeah. It certainly doesn't seem to be a breakout mass market hit at the moment, but you never know.
But Kojima did say that he made some changes to the game to stop it being too popular, which is classic Kojima. And also, well done, you succeeded.
The cool kids like the game, and all of us non-fedora wearing people, I guess we don't. That's fine.
Yeah. I actually am impressed by Forza Horizon 5. I mean, I say I'm impressed. That game franchise never ceases to surprise me, actually. It is the hero title. If you discount Bethesda and Activision, it's just the king on Xbox. And obviously now it's on PlayStation, still in the top 5, creeping up in the annual chart as well. That's Xbox's multi-platform strategy really, paying off. We've seen like CFEs doing really well initially on PlayStation as well. So, and this one seems to have some real legs. It feels like a proper fit for the, racing games are popular on all franchises, but on all platforms. But it is different to the Gran Turismo as well as an IP. I have to caveat this. My brother works for Playground Games, so I'm obviously very pleased to see a Playground Games title do very well in the charts. But although he's working on Fable, but it seems to have done very well. It seems to show that strategy is working. Yeah,
we've been seeing this now for about a year or so now, where these, no matter who makes them, the cross-platform ports are generally, every month you're seeing some new game pop up that's been gone for a while. And you're like, well, how'd that happen? Well, it came out on another platform. You look at Stellar Blade, number 5 on the month, came out on PC, was 185th on the May chart, jumped to 5th because of the PC release. So there's these opportunities for everyone, to bring their content to more players. I mean, people who buy a hardware system these days, they're doing it because of the ecosystem, because of their friends list. Like, you're not going to get people to buy or transition boxes because of exclusives anymore. We're way beyond that point. Like, people are entrenched into their systems, and bringing the content to them is the only way to win.
Yeah.
And that's what everyone's doing, except for Nintendo. They kind of do their own thing. But even they could benefit from it. But of course, like, they won't. That's not their MO. So
yeah, for them it's interesting. You've got what I love the most when you talk about PlayStation, Xbox is all about going to PC. And every time I talk about Nintendo, it seems to be the mobile. So there's that Pokemon Friends game yesterday, mobile and Switch too. There's a lot of that. But it's interesting. People talk about them being entrenched into the digital ecosystem and their communities, and I think that's probably true. But I think what's also true is we've got so much stuff to play and watch and listen and read. We're so much stuff. Even if there's a game I like that's on a platform I don't own, or I'm really interested in playing that, I can't really justify buying that device because the current device I've got like 100 things I've not played that I also really want to play. So even if I was tempted to switch device, it has to be an incredibly good reason for me to go to something else as a gamer. But not because it's because I've just I'm not short of entertainment. I think there was a time there was scarcity of things to play and now there just isn't. And
there certainly isn't. And now with everything playing Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, which is the baseline expectation that, someone's main live service game, all of the other games are basically frosting on the cake at this point. In the US, at least, the top 10 live service games suck up half of all gaming time every month, and every other game's got to fight for the remainder of that. So this is all nice to have stuff. When you look at it at the most fundamental level, especially on the PlayStation and Xbox platforms, and so bringing that content to where people are is the only way you're going to be able to win in an environment like we're looking at right now. So Forza being this strong, I mean, that's great. If they come out day one across systems, that really bodes well for its next iteration. And every game finding its way to multiple storefronts and ecosystems, I mean, that's how you're going to survive and win.
Yeah. And not even just to other platforms, but to cinema, to other forms of products and Lego, whatever. You also did a full year chart, which Monster Hunter Wilds was at number 1, which didn't surprise me. And I knew it did really well when it launched. I saw it did. But Elder Scrolls Oblivion at number 2, ahead of Assassin's Creed, well, ahead of everything, really. That's tremendous for a remaster. I mean, incredibly, the studio behind it did some layoffs this last month, which, I understand these things aren't always directly related, but for me, it's but mad considering how well that game's done. But it just goes to show the demand for a new Elder Scrolls that might be out there.
It does, and it also is another just reminder that people love playing the games they love, and if you give them an opportunity to return to a game that maybe they haven't played in a decade or more, they're going to show up. Especially if you do a decent job on the remaster or the remake. I think there was some conversation online yesterday about how the remasters and remakes are making it so new games can't be made, which is just not at all how it works. Like, but this is another example of a market demand for this type of content, and so people are trying to meet it.
It's the maturity of the industry. If you look at film and TV, and you look at in the 80s, right, Back to the Future, one of the biggest movies of the 80s, set in the 50s, right? This idea of going back 20, it's a modern thing. It appeals to modern people, but if you get an idea of sort of going back 20 years, 30 years in some cases, really can work, because you've got people who are now in their 30s or 40s who are nostalgic for their youth, that are interested in playing that. They're interested in maybe showing their kids that. You've got that sort of thing. In the 90s, it was Austin Powers. In the 60s, right? You've got these sort of trends. It happens in other forms of entertainment. The X-Files reboot happened, all these sort of things, the Jurassic World coming back, all those sort of things are all speaking to that. They bring in new audiences to speak to old audiences. We are now in the sort of early noughties revival for video games at the moment. Yeah. We're seeing a lot of that. And so, it fits, and that's part of the audience getting older. And when we're talking about, we talked about it last week on the show, people aging out of video games, particularly console and PC games. And actually, having a bunch of handhelds, which gives people a little bit easier for people to play, that play System Shock 2 or, Oblivion or stuff like that. I think that's brilliant. It's certainly I'm playing a lot more games as a result of it, and it hopefully keeps people in gaming a little bit longer. But
and on the console ecosystem in particular, we're seeing the average age and average income level of the console player actually growing, while we're seeing younger people and people on the lower end of the affluent scale, as we like to say, choosing more readily available devices like PCs and mobile devices. So we're actually seeing an aging up of that console audience. And it makes sense, right? If you got a N64 under the tree as a kid, you're probably still playing consoles. If you're playing video games, you still think that's really cool. If you're a 12-year-old, consoles are kind of for old people at this point. So like there's a little bit of that happening too. But yeah, reselling someone's youth, it's never been a bad way to try to make a buck. So
yeah.
Unfortunately, the game's pretty good and people really seem to like it. So that being that high, a little surprising, sure, like especially for a shadow dropped game that kind of came out of nowhere if you're not really dialed into the internet conversation. But seeing that do so well, it's pretty cool.
Interesting. Okay, I'll ask this question. There is a connection here because you've pointed out some real good growth for subscription, right? Yeah. A really big jump. You said before you've been seeing it every month this year, really. What drove that in June? Was it Nintendo Switch Online?
So Nintendo Switch Online, but a general increase. Another one that was a bit of a surprise that I had to be reminded the game existed. Star Wars: The Old Republic had a nice bump in subscribers in the month. We've been coming off of this in the U.S. in particular. I don't know if this has been the same case in Europe, but in the U.S. after the Revenge of the Sith 20th anniversary release and Andor, Star Wars Battlefront 2 started to pick up. In fact, that was, what was that, number 17 on the May chart, Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Oh, wow.
We've had this whole Star Wars kind of resurgence in the U.S. and the Old Republic also saw a bit of a resurgence. So it wasn't the biggest factor of what that spending increase was, but it was there, and that has been interesting. I think what we're seeing, for years, subscription spending in the U.S. was flat for 3 to 4 years. Then when Call of Duty showed up on Game Pass, we got a bump. We were expecting it. Wasn't as big as we thought it was going to be. I mean, obviously, the entire strategy of Xbox has shifted. I don't know if that was the cause, but probably wasn't not an influence. And then it started to come back down again, like, okay, it'll have a bump, it'll set a new level, fine. But instead, what we've started to see are increases every month in subscription spending. And I don't know for sure, but I think this is partially being driven by consumers looking for value as things like housing and utilities and food in the US continue to show these pretty significant increases. And so I think people are looking for value a little bit as well. So they're turning to subscriptions to try to find more value for their gaming dollar. I don't know if that's true, but that's my hypothesis at least.
Well, yeah, and I think you're probably right. And also mixed with the fact that, particularly on Game Pass, we've had a really strong run since that Call of Duty. So there was Indiana Jones, and then there was Avowed and South of Midnight. And okay, South of Midnight may not be the biggest thing in the world, but Expedition 33, Oblivion, as we've just talked about, Doom, with Tony Hawk's a couple of weeks ago. There's been a really just a consistent slate of actually AAA games going into that service that probably had a bit of an impact, certainly on Game Pass. Anyway, the reason why I mentioned the Nintendo Switch Online was because we're talking about nostalgia, and of course the big thing with the Nintendo Switch Online on Switch 2, I imagine most of it's people who just want to get the Zelda improvements included without having to pay for the upgrade path. But obviously the GameCube games coming to Switch 2 might have had some connection there with the sort of nostalgia play.
Yeah, I mean, I'm subscribing to it so the better half could play Dr. Mario. But yeah, I mean, the content library on the Switch Online is actually really great. And especially with all the bundles that happened with Switch 2.
Oh, right, yes.
You're going to see a big uptick in Switch Online subscribers. And and they're more incentivizing that service. Nintendo, like, they're never going to be a first mover. They're going to wait years, but eventually they're going to catch up. And they're also offering incredible value while also offering differentiation to support the premium purchasing. So they're kind of taking the best lessons from everyone else and applying them as they tend to do.
I did have one question from a reader, by the way, because you did this obviously big chart for the year to date. Somebody wants a chart. I think you used to do them. 1995 to date is what the the mega chart of the biggest US games of all time. So there's a clamour amongst your fans, Matt, for an update on that.
I can do that. Number one will be Grand Theft Auto 5 forever.
Permanently.
For years, at least. Until I'm dead, then maybe Grand Theft Auto 6. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Worth noting, there were a few games. June was quite a busy month for video game launches. We're talking about a lot of the big sort of console and PC titles there, but there was also Dune Awakening came out, which did 1 million copies globally. Kepler launched Rematch, which also found a pretty big audience. And then there's also other games like I think FBC. I always get FTC Firebreak. I think I'm thinking about the US body, but no, didn't do very well. I think that's been a bit of a disappointing launch. But then the indie game on Steam Peak also did incredible numbers. And then there's Splitgate 2, which we'll come back to. I think that's a free to play game.
Yeah.
That didn't deliver what was needed of it from by the sounds of it. So it was a really mixed month. And I was talking to somebody else is using the example of the games that missed as an example to say that the market's in trouble. Last week it was Jacob from Genvid. But I think the games industry's always been like this.
Always.
So every time you have a busy month with lots of releases, you have some games that do really well and some games that miss. And I think what's different today is that games that do really well can do really well. And the games that miss can really miss. Like you're starting to see that there can be quite a low figure. You saw with Concord and other titles like that. But I still think, there's clearly an appetite for games because there's big games doing well as those games that aren't doing very well. And I know that we can get caught up in the negativity, but there were some clear hits in June.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to forget about the failures. We remember the successes, like just as people. We tend to do that generally. But yeah, the industry's always been like this. But I don't know what you think on this one. But, I keep kicking around. You see it every time. You see it on the internet or in commentary every time a big game does great. Someone will comment, okay, when are the layoffs, right? And this is obviously tremendous challenge. Or every time I put out a number and it says the market grew, it's like, okay, well, why are there so many layoffs then? Well, it's because the winners are winning more and the pie is shrinking for everybody else. The Fortnite, Minecraft, Robloxes of the world, the biggest hits, the biggest games are taking more and more share of that market. So even if that market is growing a bit, it's all going to this very small, tiny group of biggest titles. And everyone else is scrambling for the rest of the market. So, I mean, I don't know if that's your read it on it as well, but you look at some of these things and you go, like the hits, you look at it like a peak and you go, oh, see, indie games can be a hit. but the number of those types of games being released is exponentially growing, and that's only going to get worse.
It's also worth noting that, okay, a lot of layoffs happen because they've missed a deadline, some money hasn't come in, they need to cut costs. But the big organizations, they cut before the things go down, right? So they, there used to be this thing, I used to get Brendan Sinclair, who's a friend of the show and will probably be on the show again in a couple of weeks. He used to write this thing about Activision Blizzard laying staff off. They'd have record numbers and then they would lay off a load of people from their publishing division. And the reality was they didn't need the people in the publishing division, right? It wasn't that they're not a charity. They weren't going to keep a load of people working on in public relations and marketing just because they made a load of money, or we can keep them on. They're a big, vicious in a business way organization that goes, we're not going, there's no point, right? And you make the cuts early. There's an investor said it to me. You can always rehire. What you can't do is get the money back. So and don't be wrong, it's different depending on the market. I'd argue that having a team that knows each other and works well together is valuable. You can't just lose them and then bring them back again or bring different people back again. I think that it's as clear cut as that. But there is an element of sometimes cuts happen not because their last game flopped, but because of where the market's heading and what they need. Activision Blizzard were, at that time when they were cutting loads of things in publishing, they were reducing their slate. They only had like 2 or 3 games a year now, and they didn't need a international publishing organization with tons of people in every territory to release 3 games. It wasn't necessary. And so they made cuts like that. So there's that element to it as well. Like, Microsoft may have made loads of money, but those cuts were more about where things are heading rather than where they think things are heading rather than the fact they need to save money now. But as you quite rightly point out, a lot of the cuts are coming, some of the stories that come out this week, from the cuts, and we've got a couple of studios that have made some days. It's because actually things got difficult for them. We can, in fact, let's move on to some other, actually, before I move on to other stories, Matt, because there's so much in the data. We were recording this quite shortly after you released it. Was there anything else surprising for you or interesting to you in your figures that we should talk about?
I mean, the entire story is about, what Switch 2 was doing in its launch. I mean, the hope coming into this year was that a combination of Switch 2 and Grand Theft Auto 6 would help get the market back to growth. A market that hasn't grown in terms of its overall size since 2021, because of course 2021 was as high as it was for all the conditions. Losing Grand Theft Auto 6 out of the year was painful. It likely means we're not going to get back to growth overall. So I think the good news out of the story beyond just the initial success of Switch 2 is that everything else from a market perspective, from a consumer demand perspective, is where we want it to be in terms of maintaining market size. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to benefit equally. That doesn't mean that the same dollars are available to everyone, because they're certainly not. But we're not seeing a pullback in demand as much as I'd feared we may, given all of the crazy market conditions in the US right now. So from that respect, feeling pretty good about where we are in terms of the market. But we're going to have to see how we continue over time. So I think, looking at from a more macro perspective, the consumer is here. The enthusiast player is here. They're spending. That leaves opportunity for people who are able to capitalize on it. And I think that's the big takeaway I take away, at least.
Yeah, good. I was relatively pleased when I saw the numbers. I thought that was I know a lot of it was Switch 2, but I felt it was positive. Well, let's talk about some other stories quickly before we wrap up. I love to do the little bit of a roundup. But one of them just came in just as I was about to record this episode. So the Xbox has reduced the price of their unreleased upcoming Q4 title, The Outer Worlds 2. This is the sequel to Obsidian's Fallout-like RPG. It was going to carry the higher $80 price point. Microsoft's going for this game. It had a big focus for it during its Summer Game Fest showcase that it put on. But Microsoft has changed its mind after reviewing current market conditions. And I'm guessing this is something you'd approve of, Matt.
Yeah. There must have been some really interesting conversations that happened. I imagine the team's calls for a little bit were colorful and fun. Fly on the wall of the teams convo would have been a good time. But yeah, this is, I think it's a smart move. Will it make a massive difference? I don't know. But I think it is reacting to the consumer feedback and perhaps some pre-order volume and saying, okay, well, maybe we should think about this again, and we'll see if there's a bump, and we'll see if there's a bump in pre-orders or whatever about that. But yeah, it's super interesting. The timing is super interesting. Just everything about it's interesting, but don't know what to say beyond that other than, man, I bet there's some really cool teams called transcripts floating around.
Well, Borderlands 4 obviously was expected to be $80, and then it wasn't. And that's, they still forget the Outer Worlds 2 is in Game Pass. So on Xbox, it's going to be mostly a Game Pass title. In terms of console, it's a PS5 play. And when your other big PS5 competitor of that period is Borderlands 4, is $10 cheaper, and certainly a bigger brand in terms of brand recognition. I guess also it doesn't stand up competitively. And actually, we did do a piece last week where we looked at the biggest 2 weeks ago. So we looked at the biggest games still to come out in the year. And the Outer Worlds 2 featured on a lot of lists, but relatively low down on the list. It wasn't in the top 5 for a lot of the lists. So your pre-order volume might be a good bit.
Yeah, it's interesting these days, as opposed to say 10 years ago, like the price points the standard price points were much more locked in. These days, like we have so much variability in not only base pricing of a game, but also with all the collector's editions and gold editions and silver, all these editions that come out too, like the ways in which a game can be creatively priced are like more than they've ever been, right? So like it makes it interesting that we're seeing these kind of swings as everyone's trying to figure out what the right way to go forward is.
It's about making that value off. I always think Nintendo lost the value argument around Switch 2. I mean, online, whether they lost it in real life, I don't know. Because actually, I think the Switch 2 with Mario Kart bundle wasn't... Actually, I thought that was quite a reasonable deal. In fact, I found it quite attractive. And if you have Nintendo Switch Online, you've got all of those games that have been nicely updated. And I thought, actually, for me, I bought a Switch 2 with the Mario Kart bundle, got all of my old Switch 1 games, or the big ones, updated for free because I'm a member of Nintendo Switch Online too. And I thought, this is the good deal.
Pretty compelling.
But the argument online was actually, if you wanted Zelda, you didn't own Zelda, you didn't have the DLC, it was going to cost you $90. And if you got Switch 2 and you didn't get it with Mario Kart, that was going to cost you $80. And that's when, that noise overrided the positive value. But as you say, it's flexible pricing, as people calling it. I think there's a way of you getting quite a good deal on games if you look around.
Yeah, but what day one buyer of Switch 2 didn't already have a Switch and Zelda? Like, I get the argument, but in reality, that's not it's talk to me in November and December when people may be buying their first Nintendo Switch device, whether 1 or 2. Then the value proposition becomes more important, right?
Yeah.
It's tough to have that argument with a core consumer base that played that thing day one and was part of that 103% attach rate of Zelda to Switch One back in the day, right? But yeah. I get it. Like, people are concerned about the value. Of course they are. But brand equity and brand loyalty adds a price premium. It just does, whether it's video games or sunglasses or cars, right? It's the same idea of a luxury good being able to carry a luxury price point. And I think that applies in this case. But,
I hope the Outer World 2 does good. I think it looks great, and hopefully at that price point, it gives it a bit of a boost.
And you can always bring the price down, right? So testing that price point, probably not the worst idea, because you can always bring it down. You sure as hell can't take a price up.
Well, you can on consoles by the looks of it. But
well, I mean, if you have certain cover in the overall macro environment that lets you do that by not saying it's because of a thing, but probably being justified because of a thing like terror. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Well, let's talk about another story. This is a UK studio story. This is my home. It's the Chinese Room. They're the team behind Still Wakes the Deep. If you remember, go back in time, it's Dear Esther and Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. They've gone independent. It has acquired itself from parent company Sumo Group, Sumo Group shifting away from, they did a period of time where they had a publisher and they were doing a lot of original games. They're shifting away from that. They're back on work for hire and co-development and things like that. The management buyout was backed by VC firm Hero Capital. The Chinese Room is still working on original properties alongside the game Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. Some layoffs were made as part of the shift. They didn't actually specify how many people were laid off, but they did say they're now a team of 55 employees. I'm a big fan of the studio, but they almost basically died a little while ago before Sumo bought them out. They really downsized the studio a little while ago. Sumo bought them out and then they sort of scaled back up again. So it's nice that they're still sort of surviving. Matt, I don't know if you saw the story.
I did, with some very interesting quotes from everyone involved that carried a lot of video game industry language subtext. That was pretty entertaining from a like, oh, okay, that's what I see what they're saying, but I kind of see what they're saying. Like what the quote here, we had been working on new IP that needed investment, and that was no longer possible with Sumo's new model. Okay, like that's pretty clearly saying like, yeah, we needed to get away from these cats because they were just going to stifle anything we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Good for them for getting out. We'll see, you know, anytime a VC firm gets involved, it makes things a little interesting in terms of what the expected return is. But yeah.
No, indeed. It is Hero Capital, which is Ian Livingston vehicle. So they are games people.
Oh, that's good.
But obviously they're not looking for some small upside. They're looking for something a bit more significant than that. Speaking of, well, I'm not even sure small upside is the right way to say this. Ubisoft results came through. They delivered earnings that were below expectations. I have to say, Ubisoft's press releases do fascinate me. It's caused by lower than expected performance for Rainbow Six Siege, an unfavorable foreign exchange rate, and a partnership that won't materialize until the next quarter. I love how mysterious they are. The firm said that player spending in Rainbow Six Siege faced temporary but significant disruption due to technical pricing issues. The first time I think I've ever read our numbers were down because of a technical issue. That has since been resolved. One of the strategic changes in their release is that Ubisoft is reorganizing into creative houses. The first house is the one it's launched with Tencent, which encompasses Rainbow Six, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Tom Clancy. Basically, there's a house that has all the big games in it. And then I'm assuming there's going to be other houses. They haven't announced those. Those houses are designed to enhance quality, focus autonomy and accountability while fostering closer connections with players. I imagine there's one for Just Dance and there's one for... So it's the thing, there's a bit of a... I know that Yves Guillemot and his calls often talk about live service and big open world games. Ubisoft do make games that aren't that. They don't talk about them very much in shareholder calls because shareholders don't care about them. They do things like Splinter Cells and Prince of Persia's and stuff that has perhaps smaller margins and things like that. So that was part of it. They did announce that Assassin's Creed Shadows now has 5 million players. I think most of those are probably sales because I know they have a Ubisoft subscription service, but I can't imagine it's the bulk of that number. No. They didn't announce it was coming to Switch 2, but sort of did. And
more of that video game language. You're like, okay, yeah, it's coming to. Okay, sure, yeah,
it's coming to other platforms. Which other platforms could they be? Is it coming to Switch 2? I can't possibly comment. Okay, it's coming to Switch 2.
Who knows?
A week before they let slip they're working on a Ghost Recon game. You don't normally get this from the big publishers. You get smaller companies just sort of sneakily letting you know that something's coming up. But it's nice. I didn't mind any of that. It's tough for Ubisoft. They are a big organization. They make a lot of stuff. I don't know how. I mean, I know that they've gone through really tough times for many, many reasons. I actually quite like them. I think we focus too much on the big games. If you look at some of their art house stuff and some of their retro stuff and they do some interesting things. I was a big fan of the Mario & Rabbids games, for instance. But I think they've had to sell their crown jewels effectively to a degree to Tencent.
Yep.
I hope that, there's a survival at the end of this for some of these IPs because a lot of people that work there and a lot of great games.
It's a fundamentally different company moving forward than it was in the past, right? With the new structure and the folks running the new structure, particularly the division that holds the Assassin's Creed IP. Those are folks who have, background in Web3. Their background isn't big single player experiences that don't try to monetize to an excessive degree, right? So I think what we have to expect moving forward is a very different company with different output, would be my expectation, and different goals. And there's a lot, I'm sure there's a lot of, on the financial side, allocation of debt, allocation of resources, and how all that's being worked out. But I don't know. I don't know if the Ubisoft however you'd like to pronounce it,
Ubisoft, yeah,
is going to be the same. I think this is a fundamentally different thing now.
the thing is, we talked about this last week on the show. We talked about the fact that there's almost two industries. There's this live service industry, which I often associate more with like going to the pub and playing snooker or pool or whatever, or going bowling, than and you've got this sort of single player, or some of it's throwaway games. Some of it, I feel like there's almost two different. These are different consumer behaviors and needs. That they obviously, time is limited, but I do feel they serve different purposes. And I talk about Microsoft. They've got Call of Duty and Minecraft. They probably don't need much else. Candy Crush as well. But they still invest in Keeper, and they're still investing in the Outer Worlds. And I'm glad they are. And I do hope that these companies still do both of those things. I hope Ubisoft is as well. But obviously that shouldn't be the focus for them. Those games need to be made at a reasonable budget with a reasonable team size, because and they can't, and they have to survive by their own means. And I think they can. It's just whether or not Ubisoft want to, if you're a big company and you want to focus all your energies on Assassin's Creed and Far Cry and those sort of things, they have to ask themselves, is Prince of Persia a distraction? Is Beyond Good and Evil 2 a distraction? Or actually, is that okay for them to continue supporting? I'm hoping the answer is the latter, but with you, I expect a different outcome.
I don't know if the big publishers are nimble enough and can move fast enough to make some of these more story-based experiences or narrative experiences at a budget and in a time window that a smaller studio can, or one that's just dedicated to that kind of craft. And I don't even think if they would want to spend their time there as much when the potential return, is tough to say that, our risk or our investment in this game is worth this potential return, when some of the other potential return they may be looking at could be considerably higher at a higher risk rate, right? But that's like the quintessential problem with AAA or quadruple A, whatever, games these days, right?
It's interesting, it's a point to say that, Xbox are making all these single player sort of adventures alongside their big live service games. But you have to say one of the biggest hits they've had on their platform outside of Oblivion has been Expedition 33 as a Game Pass title, which was a third party. Should they not just be supporting independent studios that are doing this rather than necessarily going after themselves, when actually they're better play maybe Minecraft and Call of Duty? Look, not my problem, but I do hope hope everyone comes out of it happy. I'll end with one last story, which isn't a happy story, unfortunately. It's developer 1047 Games is unlaunching Splitgate 2. The live service game has suffered some negative feedback since launch. I mean, I saw the early player numbers. I thought they seemed all right, but it doesn't appear to have sustained. So the title is returning to its beta state to work on the game further and react to fan complaints. As a result of rebuilding the core experience, and it is laying off a number of employees and taking the original Splitgate offline, because that was costing the firm a considerable amount of money. That just shows how hard, the thing is with live service games, even if you have a big launch, that, we saw it with X Defiant last year. There's almost two challenges with live service games. One, somehow convincing people to put down the games they're playing and playing your game. That's hard. And then it's really hard to stop them going back. And we saw with X Defiant, I think lots of Call of Duty players probably put down their controllers. Well, I'll give that a go. That seems interesting. Played it for a bit and then ended up going back to the game that they've spent, thousands of hours and have their communities in, and went back to it. And then ultimately that game ended in a Splitgate 2. It seems to me like, it did an okay job at attracting people day one, but it hasn't been able to keep them. And now it's got a bit like Remedy with FBC Firebreak, and now they're trying to rectify that. And the good thing about live service games, you can do that, but it's so hard.
So hard.
Yeah.
Like Siege was able to pull it off back in the day, but it gets harder and harder over time as people become more and more tied to the games that they regularly play, right? That's why it's so risky to even play in this space. But let me ask you, what term do you like more, unlaunch or negative growth? I'm torn between which more ridiculous term I like more, because they're both so just dumb as terms. But okay,
oxymorons. Yeah.
What are we doing? Unlaunching the game's out, man. Like, you can't unlock. I don't know. I agree with him though. Many mistakes were made, and unfortunately, some people had to pay the price for that. That wasn't the CEO that made the mistakes, but I think they did. Was it? This is the studio where actually they did
stopped taking the salaries. The leadership's team actually did. I think this is one of those rare instances. I might be wrong. I might need to check this, but I might check this live on the podcast. Where the actual leadership team did. They didn't lose their jobs, obviously, but I think they might have. They've not the leadership team have stopped taking salaries, which is, not the same as losing their jobs, but they at least there's something there. But yeah, it's unfortunately the way of things, but hopefully it comes out and it finds an audience. Although I don't know, I'd be terrified backing a live service game this year. Even when something like Bungie and Marathon has to suffer, whether that comes out or not, I hope it does. But it's, the truth is, success in this industry also, if I'm a big company, I'm terrified, because the reality is, they're one of the big games the game that's getting more traction and more exciting than the Sony-owned, Bungie-developed Marathon is Arc Raiders, which admittedly isn't being made by a small team that's, never made a game before. They're experienced, established team, but it's not exactly, that game is really trending high on it. And that's another extraction shooter. Success can come from anywhere, and I think that makes it scary for big companies when, in mobile, the big companies win.
Exactly.
And in PC and console, it's not quite so. I mean, obviously, live service wise, but
on the live service side, yeah. On the other side, it's different. I mean, with the big companies, the big ships turn slow. And so anything you're seeing now is a result of decisions made 2 years ago, because, you start investing in a game, like you look at Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad was the last game I did the P&L for at concept in 2016. And that game took a long time to come out, and, eventually it changed over time, but you greenlight a game, especially a big live service game that requires a lot of investment. You greenlight a game for something that might come out in 2, 3 to 4 years. And so, once you've dumped a year or two of everyone's time and money into a project, and you see the market conditions change, it still takes you a year to course correct at a big company because so much is already invested. And I think that's part of the problem we're seeing is, like, people are going, why are these companies still coming out with these games? Like, these games have been in the pipe for 4 years. Like, this has got to come out in some way, shape, or form. And the reaction to what market conditions are expected to be that take place now, you're not going to see for 2 to 3 to 4 years in the future, right? It's an impossible, highly risky game to play. And I'm glad I don't have to do it anymore because I'm no longer in publishing.
No, but they are looking at you for answers. But Matt, I've taken up way too much of your time. We've gone over time, and I absolutely love talking to you, though. I would have you on every week if I could. If you would come on every week, if you weren't so busy. But thank you so much for your time today.
That was so kind. Thank you very much. Pleasure. I hope all the sales sickos had a good time. And feel free to yell at me on the internet about it. Like you do everything else, but I love you and appreciate you.
You don't yell at me. That's it for today's episode of the Game Business Show. Again, thank you to Matt for guest hosting this week. We will be back on Tuesday for our next feature show, but we're taking a 1 week break from the news show next week as it's our summer holidays in the UK, but we are back to normal the following week. If you want to make sure you don't miss a post or an episode, head to thegamebusiness.com and sign up to our newsletter. Alternatively, subscribe to our YouTube channel or via your podcasting platform of choice. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.